I do not normally get back to people and say, hey, this is not how you look at it. This is not how you work around a scientific problem, and this is not how you present. Mainly because I know the compulsions, I know the limitations that people in India work around. Having said that, I would like to give a few tips, pointers perhaps, in how you as researchers could look at science for science itself and also benefit from that protocol and methodology to go ahead in your academic pursuit. So science for progress, academic progress. So you can do both, but if you were to look at certain aspects of looking at science for science itself. So again, like I said earlier, you will be you'll be undergoing various different talks from different experts. I'm just going to touch upon a few basic things here. One of which I'm sure you are all aware of, and in your research, academic, and publication careers, when you submit a manuscript, you always provide an introduction, a methodology, results, and a discussion section. These are four integral components of any research paper that is accepted in a scientific journal, in a scientific peer-reviewed journal. There are certain key aspects within these components that people tend to gloss over, mainly because of their own understanding of what research communication is, or lack of understanding of what research communication is. So when basically when you get a paper, I see people giving a very lengthy introduction, from the perspective of literally bringing in the entire global perspective to finally, filtering it down to their area of research, which is great if and only if the paper is also a paper that publishes or tries to convey a very broad scientific picture. If it is a very scientific, narrow, or a few important points that you're adding to science, then an introduction need not be so lengthy. It's always better to compress it to a good textual volume that represents or builds up your case for your presentation of your findings. That's all. You don't have to, bring in the entire global perspective to communicate what you're trying to say. That's one thing. The next important thing in methods is when people provide a lot of different methodologies, of course, about the study area, about the dates when the study is conducted, how exactly the methods were followed, what are the different methods that were followed, and everything else. But one thing that most manuscripts fail to have, and therefore get rejected in the very initial process, is that researchers fail to set a hypothesis. I'm sure I don't have to go into the entire reason for what a hypothesis is and why it should be set. But if you are trying to communicate to a scientific publication, you need to set your hypothesis in your methods and say, okay, what exactly is it, and what have you tried to do to either prove or disprove that as per your findings. Okay, so it's an extremely important step that one needs to consider. And this is extremely important not only for the publication, even going back to either your own studies or getting your students to do a proper scientific research. I'm sure everybody does the hypothesis before actually getting onto the experimental mode, be it lab experiments or be it field experiments. everybody sets in a hypothesis and tries to work around it. Now, this is something, again, I have seen over and over again, where because a student is available or because a student approaches an available subject of your interest, the objectives are set in from the perspective of what you understand as a teacher, of what you understand as a researcher guiding students. So, and then based on what your understanding is, in the student's thesis, the hypothesis is fitted into base the objective. Now, this is something that becomes extremely tricky, because while the hypothesis could be fitted into looking at the objectives that you have in mind, because it is your brainchild, because you understand what the entire concept is, trusting that onto another person who has stepped in new, usually green in the subject, would not completely comprehend that. So it is always better to develop your hypothesis and the objectives of your study along with the student, rather than doing it before and thrusting it on the student. It's the same thing with your own ideas. We've all done this. I've done this when I started out. Looked at something and said, "Oh, okay, great. That's great. Let me do it." And then halfway in between, I would, then fit in the hypothesis. It's not a good way to do. You'll always end up spending more time, and invariably, when you want to publish something in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, you'll come across lots of stumbling blocks. So I would say that set your hypothesis first and then start working towards it. It's a very, very important aspect.
Dr. Niranjan Rawat.
Okay. For a minute, I couldn't hear, or rather, I couldn't hear myself. The sound was very loud. Okay. So after that, obviously, you look at, you present your results, and this is something that we need to look at very carefully. The results section is not a section where you put in the world's perspective. Is not a section where you consider other people's works. A result section is a direct derivative of what you have found in your study to be presented. Now, we're all under this presumption that the result section has to be a very big section to prove our point. And therefore, in doing so, we try to bring in a whole lot of different concepts apart from our own results in the findings that we have in our study. So in doing so, a lot of people actually combine discussion with results. Now, it's not a very good thing to do. Combining discussion with results is because results is your work, is your findings, and that is the one that adds value to already existing science. So you have to be extremely careful in what you determine as your results and not confuse it with other people's works. It can be even a paragraph, it doesn't matter. It could be a paragraph of description with a lot of statistics, perhaps, or it could be descriptive based on your kind of work, which is also fine. But results is purely your findings, which you are presenting in the manuscript. Do not confuse it for anything else. Do not bring in your introduction aspects again to it. Do not bring in other people's work into your results. So please understand that that's an extremely important component of this, because after methods, results is what you are presenting to the world of your new addition to existing science. Finally, you talk about discussion, which is nothing but to see where exactly your result fits in with what is happening around you or what's happening by other people who have worked in your same field of research. You try and fit in how best your values match or don't match. Now, again, with physical sciences, it's a very different proposition as compared to life sciences. Some of the, most of the principles are universal in physical sciences. A lot of the principles are geographically based when it comes to life sciences. The entire mechanism may be universal, but the results that you find in each geographic space between different species, between different components of the life sciences that you're dealing with are different. They are not universal. So this is something that you need to be extremely careful about, and therefore not follow, if you're a life science researcher and want to publish, not follow a physical science way of including discussion, but follow a life science way of doing discussions, and vice versa. So this is an extremely important component and thing to remember. So that's just a very basic overview of what I'm sure other people will talk to you in greater detail about. What I'd like to say is I've just made a few short notes here, so I'll keep looking at my pointers here. I don't have a presentation for you, mainly because this is something that will be a lot of text again, which I'm sure you're hearing a lot of it from what I am saying. But just to tell you that the design is, as I mentioned, is extremely important. The hypothesis and the methodology that you develop is extremely important based on your limitations. If you're life science or any science, based on what limitations you have, either in the lab or in the field. So designing your experiment is an extremely important aspect. And designing it well in advance is also extremely important. Now, I understand that we're all constantly struggling with time in our academic responsibilities to do research. We're constantly pulled here and there. And so it usually happens that when we need to submit our own thesis, be it a master's or a PhD thesis or the thesis of our students, there's a lot of procrastination because of the other things that get pulled away. And then, everything else, when it comes to the absolute deadlines, everything is cramped into a short process of time to compile everything and publish. With the UGC norms now changing for everybody, I'm sure every university has its own different variations, but you need, as I understand, at least 2 peer-reviewed scientific publications before you can get your PhD, or 1 for your master's. Again, I'm just broad brushing it. It may differ for every university. So you need to keep this in mind well in advance when you're designing the program. If it's a 3-year program, it's a 5-year or a 7-year program. Keep this design in mind and keep your timetable in place to start either encouraging yourself or your student to start documenting and writing up your data as it gets accumulated, not to keep it to the last minute. This is where, again, a lot of the publications that manuscripts that I get sent, people sometimes write to me specifically requesting that I process it for them as early as possible, because their PhD thesis presentation, Viva Voce, is coming up sometime soon, and so they would like to have this paper ready by then. While I can sympathize with it, and I try to do my best, in most cases, when I'm just going through the paper, I find that a lot of the scientific presentation is compromised because of the urgency of what they want to put in and what they want to communicate, and mainly because they want to get the paper out in a specific period of time. Because that is the objective of the research and science gets lost. So this actually, believe it or not, takes more time for the student or the author to rectify. So I would say that it's extremely important for you to therefore make up your timetable and start writing up and choosing the journal of your choice, journal that you want to submit to well in advance, because every journal is different in the way they look at how the text is presented. So you need to start working towards which journal you would like to target. Go to the journal website and determine whether what you wish to present falls within the scope, within the aims of the journal. Like, for example, I get people submitting papers on tissue culture, or on animal physiology conducted in a lab setting, in a zoological lab setting, for consideration in the Journal of Threatened Taxa. While yes, both are zoology, the aim and scope of the Journal of Threatened Taxa is not to present physiological findings in a lab setting. So it doesn't make sense to waste all your time to set up that, to formulate your paper for the Journal of Threatened Taxa. You're better off formulating it for another suitable journal, so you don't waste time. So these are small tips to help you understand how you can actually save time and start working on how to meet your targets of the deadlines. I've actually addressed a couple of different things within this, including pacing your research and fieldwork experiments, so I'm not going to go into that. Importantly, when you present a paper, when you submit a manuscript to a journal, please ensure that you provide adequate time for peer review. This is an extremely important process. Peer review is a process that, as I understand, barely nobody in India understands it. Okay, there are very few people who understand what peer review is, and therefore spend adequate time reviewing other publications or sending their own publications to other people for review. Now, this is an extremely important step. Peer review is not sending it to the journal and expecting the chief editor there to just give it a glance and say, hey, everything is okay, I'll publish it. That's not peer review. A peer review is when your article that you submit, your manuscript that you submit to a journal, is sent to at least 2 or 3 people within the same field of expertise. Now, again, this is extremely important. I get a lot of people who submissions where the submissions are on a particular aspect. Say, for example, let me take the example of birds. Somebody is sent a manuscript on birds, but they then send suggested peer reviewer names with the manuscript, which is required if you want your manuscript to be processed earlier or faster, rather, to suggest 2 or 3 reviewers from the field of expertise. So when somebody submits a bird manuscript, I usually find them submitting experts from, say, from herpetology or from invertebrates, and not necessarily to do with birds. Now, again, here one has to understand that peer review is amongst your peers, which is amongst your areas or subject of expertise, not outside of the subject of expertise. So it makes absolutely no sense to send 3 suggested reviewers who have no experience in birds but have other experience in other fields of zoology. Yes, both are zoology, yes, but they're not peers for the area of expertise that you are presenting in the paper. So be very mindful of it. This leads to slowdown in the review process. The other reason in sometimes the review process can be slow is that you must understand that every one of the peers, everyone who's reviewing the manuscript also has their own priorities. All the reviewers are voluntary. They don't get paid to do this job. They are doing this review for the sake of science. They're not doing the review for your sake, not for the author's sake, but for the sake of promoting science. So as a reviewer, you also look at that so that you're not looking at who the author is and therefore building your entire review based on whether you know the author, whether you know the author or whether you know or don't know the author, whether the author has experience in the field or not. All that just does not matter. When it comes to scientific review, peer review, it just means that you are looking at the text from the perspective of understanding that it is a new scientific finding. It does not matter whether the person who submitted it has experience or not. So from the perspective of that, you then start reviewing the article. So in doing so, when you submit a manuscript and it has gone to 3 reviewers, the reviewers need their own time to assimilate what you have presented, look at other scientific resources available for them to review, and then make a decision of whether the text that you presented is adequate or needs more refinement. And all of this is keeping their time in mind and their priorities in mind. So while we give every reviewer 3 weeks, sometimes reviewers are just not available. And sometimes certain fields are overproductive. And so reviewers are all tied up. So we can't just invite people, the same people over and over again. So there are a lot of stumbling blocks when it comes to peer review process, which means that your review could take up anywhere from 3 months to 6 months, or sometimes, on rare occasions up to a year, because reviewers are not free, or because you can't find the right kind of reviewers for the submission. So these are things that you need to keep in mind when you submit to a journal. And therefore, have adequate time when you submit a manuscript. Do not submit it to any journal when you are pushed for time, when your PhD Viva Voce is 3 months down the line. You say, hey, I need within the next 1 month or 2 months this paper to be published. Please do not send such requests to the journal editor, because the journal editor is bound by the review process. It's unfair to ask of the journal editor to speed up your paper for your benefit, which is not usually, which usually cannot be done by the journal editor, because it has to undergo the peer review process. This is something that is extremely important for you to understand. And this, over the years, has led to a lot of problems. And one of the biggest problems, I'm sure you're all aware of now, is the problem of predatory journals, of predatory publications. I'll be surprised if you've not heard of it yet, but if you haven't heard of it, I would encourage you to just Google predatory publications or predatory journals to see what turns up. Okay, it's an extremely important thing that you need to understand. If I'm sure somebody else will be talking about it during the course of this week. Will be going into greater detail. But here is just a gist of what predatory publications have done and have caused an irreparable loss to science and to the authors who have published in predatory journals. This is something that you need to understand, is that because of the time taken for a good peer review process in good scientific journals, and because of the time pressures that the authors, the researchers put themselves under for not having designed their methodology and designed their work properly over 3 to 5 years, and because of the comments from peer reviewers on getting them to improve their paper, sometimes even scrapping the paper saying that the methodology is wrong and therefore the findings are wrong, a lot of the researchers in India and around the world found predatory publications or predatory journals as a great way of just publishing their findings. Why? Because predatory journals do not care for what the authors want to publish. All they care for is whether the author is willing to pay them money or not. Anywhere from 300 rupees to 3,000 to 30,000 rupees, you find predatory publications accepting anything that an author submits and publishing it, which means that science has completely gone for a toss. It is not science for science itself. It is science for academic progress. And this is a very dangerous trend. Fortunately, the UGC has now recognized this trend and has taken steps to cull down the number of publications to the good ones and have mostly dealt with all the predatory publications. However, not all the predatory publications are removed yet. You still find a lot of them on the UGC list. You still find a lot of them on the NAAC list. Okay, so it's up to you as authors to actually Google a site. It's called Beall's List, BEALL''S. Please write this down, Beall's List. Just Google it. You will get into that site and you can actually check whether the journal that you want to submit in has been identified as predatory by Beall's. Now, there are certain journals that are independent, that are predatory, but in most cases, journals are published by predatory publishers where 1 or 2 people have set up more than 100 or 300 journals in different names. And so if your journal that you're looking for is not in the independent journal list, look at the publisher and search under the Beall's List for predatory publishers and see if the journal falls into that. Any journal falling into the predatory publisher means that the journal is also predatory and your publication is in a predatory journal. So avoid that. So you need to look at those aspects. In many journals, there is a process or there is a policy against scientific misconduct. So having published in predatory journals, a lot of the people, authors are now realizing that their publications in those predatory journals are of no value to science because no good journal will accept the citations of those predatory publications. So if you had 1 or 2 or 10 or 12 or 20 publications in predatory journals, for all practical purposes, just, I would say, throw all those publications aside. They have absolutely no value for science or for you, because only thing they do is throw or show the author in a bad light. Okay, so this is something that you need to take a look at very, very carefully. Understand that if you have any publication in a predatory journal, please discard it. Do not use it. No journal will accept predatory publication citations in their publications. Okay, if you're referring to it, they'll be actively thrown out. Okay, so you might as well just remove it, not refer to any of the predatory publications. Just take it, if you've already done so, just take it as a hazy period of your life and move on. Start working on publishing in good journals from now on. What happens is, because of the policy against scientific misconduct that different journals have, and again, I'm speaking from the perspective of the Journal of Threat and Taxa that I run, is we have very strict guidelines. Anybody using predatory publications as citations, we write back to the author saying that this paper is based on predatory publications, so you need to reframe the entire article, manuscript. And sometimes it is rejected outright. Because if your entire premise of your research is based on predatory publications, then you are following something that is completely wrong. So we reject the articles or the manuscripts. So be extremely mindful of it, because when you're mindful of what, with the time, you need to be mindful of how best to save time and be more productive. So this is a good tip to work on. The other thing that I find repeating very often is, again, scientific misconducts from various different parts of the globe, not only in India, but from various different countries around India and from around the world, is people submitting articles that they are not actually responsible for the research. I find a lot of teachers publishing articles in their names, and the students who have actually done the work are just acknowledged, if at all. And their names are not even there as co-authors. So this is something that is extremely important, because even if you're successful in publishing it, the kind of backlash that you will get from the students or from others who know that this is not exactly the case actually will promote retraction of the publication. So we have in the past retracted some of the publications that have misrepresented science or misrepresented the actual researcher. So this is extremely important to understand. And the other thing is that in many cases, we also find that the teachers are the ones who put their names first, and then followed by the student who's actually done the research. This is also considered a scientific misconduct. The person who's conducted the research should usually go first. As a teacher, as a mentor, as a guide who has perhaps equal share in, or sometimes more, because develop the methodologies and all that, in doing the experiment and therefore writing up the paper, the teacher has to have a second approach or credit that comes after the main researcher who comes in as the first name. So this is something that one needs to be extremely aware of and careful while working with publications, while submitting publications. There are other various different things that we come across when people submit to the Journal of Threat and Taxa, and this is also the case in most other journals, good journals that I interact with the editors of. people don't understand, authors don't understand the different aspects of plagiarism. Plagiarism, as one understands, is not just copy paste, is not just copying what is available in some other publication and pasting it in the manuscript that is submitted. That is not just plagiarism. Plagiarism comes in various different forms. It could be a duplication. And this I find over and over again, where authors submit slightly changed results and discussions of the same findings that they have conducted as a second or third paper. Now, this again, because they're forced to publish 2 papers at least for before the Viva Voce, they somehow think that publishing the same findings in 2 different ways makes 2 different research findings. That's not the case. That is considered plagiarism. It's duplicate submission. Okay, so that is a scientific misconduct. Yes. Copying, obviously, verbatim from some other scientific publication, or even a thesis, or a report, or a newspaper article, or a magazine, copying verbatim into the article without explicitly quoting it, quoting the reference from where the line has been taken from, also is plagiarism. Copy paste, as I said, is plagiarism. Using somebody else's data is plagiarism. Student suppression, the one that I said earlier, is plagiarism. And importantly, giving authorships to people who are not concerned with the research at all, mainly because one would like to please their seniors in the department for academic progress or for politics, including somebody else's name, your senior's name, the HOD's name, or the principal's name, or the forest department's chief wildlife warden's name, into the paper for which they have absolutely no contribution to, is also plagiarism. So these are all scientific misconducts that one needs to understand, that when you are submitting to a good journal, all these will be vetted for. And if any one of these things are questioned, it could be either at the beginning or towards the end, then your publication, your manuscript could be rejected even after it is finally accepted. Or even if it is published and later on found out that there has been some sort of a scientific misconduct that is conducted, the article could be retracted, which means that you lose out on the publication completely. And not only that, it becomes a black mark. So these are some of the things that we need to understand and work with. So I shall just round it up and summarize this, because I don't want to take too much of your time. We've already crossed 45 minutes here. Is please be mindful when it comes to science, it is science that matters. Personal issues do not matter. If you have taken up science as your career, please understand that you are working for science. You're not working for yourself. And this is extremely important. And once that is understood and you start working for science, you will see wonders happening with your personal growth. And it's a great way of actually not only contributing to the promotion of the sciences around you, to the promotion of the natural system, just be it just basic observations of natural history or basic observations of everyday science, or be it cutting edge science, as people love to call it. From across the different spectrum, you will find that you are contributing to science for what science stands for, and not contributing to self-growth, compromising science. That's when it not only helps science grow, it also helps you grow academically. I can give you various examples of people from various different universities who have become academically very, very proficient and very successful just because they have strictly maintained the sciences, worked on sciences. One of the person that I would like to promote here, or rather, no, not promote, but mention here is Dr. Meva Singh, who's a lifetime scientist at Mysore University. If you were to just Google him and find his scientific output, you will understand why he's become such a great person academically. And there are various other people for that. Srinivaslu, in your midst, is one such person. So I don't have to go anywhere else. He's one such person. So you need to just look at his progress in academics based on his scientific outputs. And I'm sure a lot of other people who he'll be inviting onto this over the next 1 week will be people of such caliber. So please look out for that. And as and when experts talk to you about various different aspects of the scientific research process and research design, keep this talk in mind and keep coming back to this so that you can tie in all these different aspects of sciences, of research methodologies, of the processes of design, of publication, everything in one holistic way of looking at science and the scientific pursuit. I'd like to wish you all the very best in your careers, and I hope this talk has made sense and will help you develop your vision and your future in a more robust manner from the publications point of view also. Please do not take it amiss if when I say you, I'm sure a lot of you are already doing it and are well on your way of doing this. Please don't take it amiss, because this is a talk I give for the general academic groups. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope this made sense. And if you have any queries, please feel free to either ask me right now, or if you have any queries that you would like to ask later, I'm sure you can contact Dr. Srinivaslu, who will write to me, or you can. I think our email IDs will be shared, so you can write to me directly also. Okay, you're most welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sanjay, for a wonderful insight into what really matters with respect to good research. And I was just wondering that, Sanjay started with something which is the last part of the research process, and that is reporting. Good reporting is what makes you visible in the peers, among the peers. So that is where we need to put our emphasis on when we are thinking about the whole research being done. We need to start right from having that pertinent research question and going through the process and think about how you are going to disseminate the findings of the research process through good research writing. So that is where this whole program is planned to. Before I go into the details, if any one of you have any questions, you can directly interact with Sanjay, Dr. Sanjay, and please do. Does any of the Okay, there are some questions that are coming in chat, but it's not with respect to our research program. It is with respect to HRDC is going to take care of those things. HRDC will get back to you about those things. Yeah, if you don't have any questions, it is my pleasure. Any? It is my pleasure to propose the vote of thanks to Dr. Sanjay Molur. Dr. Sanjay Molur, as you have seen, as you have heard him, he is a person who speaks with experience. It is like, he is the person who is doing good research, is also responsible for seeing that good research is being reported. And Dr. Sanjay, as well as a small team of and this tribe is growing, a small team of dedicated researchers and scientists and academicians are all kind of coming together to create awareness amongst the Indian academia and scientists and researchers about what kind of irreparable damage the predatory journal or the way the predatory journals are functioning is doing on our scientific output. Here, very recently, we had a IQAC coordinators, quality assurance, cell coordinators workshop also, and wherein I said that when we are looking at Osmania University's research publication, on an average, we produce almost about 1,000 research papers annually from various sections of our faculties, of which 52% are not listed on Scopus database. Only 48% are listed. So that kind of, although we have large number of, publications coming out from the university faculty, university researchers, but less than 50% are of standards. Less than 50% are, getting us some kind of recognition, and more than 50% is going in the, I'm sorry to use this word, in the waste paper basket. So it doesn't give me like IQAC coordinator, it did not give me any points over there. I have lost lots of points when we went for accreditation and assessment process and all such kind of things. It not only matters to university, but also it matters to your colleges, it matters to the state, it matters to the nation, that like what percentage of good research is being published. That is what matters. So kindly take all these kind of advice that Dr. Sanjay has given you about writing good papers, doing good research, plan it out. That is what is very much needed. Thanks once again, Dr. Sanjay, for on behalf of HRDC UGC, Osmania University, on behalf of Osmania University, as well as on my personal behalf. I thank you very much for being today's chief guest for the program, and sharing your experiences with us. And as you have pointed out, we also have good speakers, and yeah, in the course, people will come to know about that, what kind of emphasis we have given on research analysis and research reporting, etc., etc. So thanks once again for being with us, Dr. Sanjay.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Sir, on behalf of HRDC also, I thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation and coming and addressing the gathering here, who have come from all the degree colleges of Telangana state, sir. I'm really thank you and thankful, and hope we not only this one, sir, we will have more interaction with other courses which we are running at our HRDC, sir. So this is informal way. What do you call, sir, invitation, but officially we will definitely get back to you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I thank our coordinators, Dr. Chalmala Srinivaslu, sir, also for taking up this assignment for the benefit of the degree college lecturers. Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.